two men, one demolition derby field in rural Utah, one accidental crash so violent that Paul Cox genuinely thought he'd just killed his opponent. That opponent was Matt Wetzel, and somehow that near disaster was the beginning of one of YouTube's most beloved off-road friendships. For years, Fab Rats and Matt's off-road recovery felt like two sides of the same coin. Same Utah dirt, same circle of people, same passion for building things that shouldn't work, and then driving them somewhere they probably shouldn't go. Their audiences overlapped, their families were intertwined, and fans assumed that bond was unbreakable. But somewhere between viral fame, government lawsuits, and a high-ticket live event that divided an entire community, things got quiet between them. No blow-up, no call-out video, just two channels that used to share a screen, now running in completely different directions. And the story of how it happened is more interesting than most fans realize. To understand what Fab Rats and Matt's off-road recovery meant to each other, you have to go back before either channel existed. Paul Cox and Matt Wetzel first crossed paths at a Washington County Fair demolition derby, the kind of small-town event where everyone knows everyone, and settling scores happens at about 40 miles an hour. Matt won, Paul didn't, and according to Paul himself, that result didn't exactly spark a friendship. The two went their separate ways, and that could have been the end of it. But derby guys tend to find each other again. The next time Paul and Matt met on the field, Paul hit Matt's car so hard he climbed out convinced he'd seriously injured him. Thankfully, Matt walked away fine, and something about surviving that kind of chaos together apparently does wonders for a relationship. The two became close friends, and before long, their families were just as tight. When Matt launched Matt's off-road recovery in early 2019, it was Michelle Cox, Paul's wife, who he brought in to edit his videos. Think about that for a second. The woman who would later become the production backbone of Fab Rats was helping build Amour's content from the ground floor. These weren't just friendly neighbors, they were genuinely building something together. Paul launched Fab Rats in March 2020, and the audience crossover was immediate. Fans of Matt's channel found Paul naturally, same Utah landscape, same no-nonsense approach to off-road builds, same family-first energy. From the outside, it looked less like two separate channels and more like one extended crew. For a while, that's exactly what it was. By 2022, the Utah off-road YouTube world had quietly become something special. Matt's off-road recovery was pulling massive numbers. Fab Rats was growing fast, and the two channels were appearing in each other's content regularly enough that fans started treating them as a single universe. Trail runs in Moab, shop visits, group recoveries with Bleepin' Jeep's Colt and Matt in the same frame as Paul and his crew. Cousin Merlin from Merlin's old school garage weaving in and out of both orbits. It felt organic because it was. These weren't calculated brand partnerships or algorithm-chasing collabs. These were people who genuinely spent time together and happened to have cameras rolling. The peak of all of it came in March 2023. Matt organized the first ever off-road wrecker games at Sand Hollow State Park in Hurricane, Utah, a live competition pulling together the biggest names in off-road recovery YouTube. Fab Rats showed up, Merlin showed up, Trailmater's Rory was there, BSF Recovery, the whole ecosystem in one place, competing head-to-head in front of a live crowd. Paul even had a booth at the event. Fans drove from across the country just to see the people they'd been watching on their phones for years. By any measure, it was the high point, a celebration of everything this corner of YouTube had built together. What nobody in that crowd could have known was that it would also be the last time the full crew assembled under Matt's banner. Within months, things would start shifting, quietly at first, then in ways the entire fan base couldn't ignore. While the collaborative era was still going strong on screen, something significant was happening behind the scenes at Fab Rats. Paul Cox was quietly outgrowing the idea of being anyone's supporting act. In late 2021 and into early 2022, Paul made a decision that his wife Michelle described as nerve-wracking. He walked away from the telephone company job he'd held for over 20 years to go full-time on YouTube. No safety net, just a garage in Glendale, Utah, a camera, and a belief that what he was building was worth the risk. Then came the project that changed everything. In 2022, Paul spotted a social media photo of a small yellow speedboat that had emerged from the receding waters of Lake Powell, a vessel that had been sitting at the bottom for nearly 30 years. He tracked it down, brought in Cousin Merlin and his iconic yellow wrecker, and launched what the channel called Operation Yellow Submarine. The series went viral. It trended on YouTube. It brought in an entirely new audience who had never heard of Matt's off-road recovery and found Paul completely on his own terms. But that same period carried real personal weight. In late November 2022, Paul lost his father Sherman, the man he credited with teaching him everything he knew about working with his hands. Paul didn't hide it. He paid tribute publicly, restoring his father's old truck on camera and telling his audience he'd lost his best friend. Between the viral success and the personal grief, Fab Rats entered 2023 as a channel that had found its own identity, one that no longer needed to exist in anyone else's shadow. The Operation Yellow Submarine series should have ended on a perfect note. Paul and his crew recovered a 30-year-old speedboat, restored it, drove it to Georgia, and returned it to the family it belonged to. A feel-good story with millions of views and zero loose ends. Then a Utah Division of Wildlife Resources officer showed up. The citation accused Fab Rats of illegally transporting the boat across state lines without stopping at a DWR inspection station because the vessel had been covered in quagga mussels and invasive species when they first pulled it from Lake Powell. Paul's position was straightforward. They had thoroughly cleaned the boat before moving it, and stopping at an inspection station wasn't required under those circumstances. The DWR's position was equally firm. Paul didn't quietly pay the fine. He went public, posted a video laying out exactly what happened, and told his audience plainly that he intended to fight it in court. The community response was overwhelming. Fans, boaters, and outdoor recreation advocates rallied behind him, with many arguing the citation was heavy-handed and that the officer involved had a pattern of overzealous enforcement. The case drew enough attention that it didn't just fade away. Utah legislators took notice. The controversy around DWR enforcement conduct became part of a wider conversation that eventually led to the state passing new law enforcement oversight legislation, signed into effect with a restructured division launching in January 2025. A YouTube channel about recovering old trucks had indirectly moved the needle on state policy. Paul won more than the legal argument. He proved that Fab Rats had built an audience that would stand behind him, with or without anyone else's platform backing him up. While Paul was fighting government citations and building an independent audience, Matt Wetzel was moving in a very different direction, and the scale of that move would catch a lot of people off guard. At some point between the first Wrecker Games in 2023 and the planning stages of 2024, Matt brought in Darrell Eves, a prominent television producer and YouTube growth consultant with a track record of turning grassroots channels into full media operations. Eves had publicly partnered with Matt before, even featuring him on his own platform to discuss multi-channel growth strategy. But this time, the collaboration appeared to go much deeper. The 2024 Off-Road Games, scheduled for March 14-16 at Sand Hollow State Park, looked almost nothing like the Wrecker Games that fans had loved the year before. Instead of a tight circle of off-road recovery specialists competing on their home turf, the new format invited 14 general YouTubers from completely outside the off-road space to pair up with 14 off-road creators and tackle the course together. Adult tickets were priced at $124.99. The event promised $50,000 in giveaways, sponsor booths from major brands, and production values that signaled this was no longer a passion project. For longtime fans, the reaction was mixed at best. Many felt the soul of what made the original event special. The authenticity, the tight-knit community, the sense that everyone on that course genuinely lived this life was being traded in for something shinier and far more commercial. And it wasn't just fans who felt that way. Some of the most familiar faces in that off-road world had already made their decision. They just hadn't announced it yet. When the announcements came, they came quickly. Fab Rats wouldn't be attending the 2024 Off-Road Games. Neither would Merlin's Old School Garage. Neither would Casey Liddell, three of the most recognizable names from the original off-road YouTube circle, all stepping away from the same event at the same time without any coordinated public explanation. For a fan base that had been watching these people share screens for years, it landed hard. Forum threads lit up overnight, comment sections filled with theories, and the question everyone kept asking was the same one nobody could definitively answer: what actually happened? Paul's publicly stated reason pointed to liability. The 2024 format required creators to hand their vehicles over to outside YouTubers who had never driven anything like them. For someone like Paul, whose Toyota FJ represents years of custom fabrication work, that's not an unreasonable concern. Others in the community weren't so sure that told the whole story. Reddit threads alleged that disagreements over compensation were a factor, that some creators felt the revenue being generated by a $125 per head ticketed event warranted a larger cut than what was being offered. Those claims were never confirmed by anyone involved. Other fans pointed to the fundamental format shift itself, arguing that creators like Paul simply wanted no part of an event that had drifted so far from its original identity. What's notable is what nobody did. Paul never made a call-out video. Matt never addressed the absences publicly. There was no drama, no receipts, just a quiet, deliberate distance between people who used to show up for each other without hesitation. Sometimes that kind of silence says more than any statement could. Here's the thing about this story: nobody lost. Matt's off-road recovery is bigger than ever. The channel has grown into a full media operation, running live events, building brand partnerships, and reaching audiences that extend well beyond the off-road niche it started in. Whatever direction Matt chose to take, the numbers suggest it's working. Fab Rats is thriving too. Paul Cox has built a channel sitting north of 600,000 subscribers that operates entirely on its own terms: raw fabrication, family involvement, and an audience that proved during the DWR fight that their loyalty runs deeper than just entertainment. He doesn't need a cosign from anyone, but something that felt genuinely rare in the YouTube world: an organic, unscripted brotherhood between creators who actually knew each other before the cameras arrived, has quietly faded. No falling out confirmed, no bridges visibly burned. Just two operations that grew large enough to stop needing each other. Maybe that's the most honest ending this story could have. Not a blow-up, not a scandal, just two men from the same Utah dirt who built something together without realizing it, and then built something bigger apart. Whether they ever share a screen again is anyone's guess.